That seat is for real family. Get out. My father didn't ask nicely. He physically shoved my 9-year-old niece, Zoe, knocking her chair sideways just to make room for another stack of designer boxes for my sister. Zoe stumbled back, shivering in her coat, because he refused to turn on the heat. He looked down at her like she was dirt on his floor, not a child. He didn't care that she was freezing or scared. He just wanted her gone so his golden child could have more space for her presence. Zoe was clutching the battered leather case to her chest like a life preserver. It held her grandfather's antique violin, the only thing he had left her before he passed away last year. It wasn't valuable to anyone else, the wood was scratched, the varnish worn, but to Zoe, it was magic. She had been practicing Silent Night for weeks, hoping to play it for the family. Thomas noticed the case. His eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with annoyance. To him, the old, scuffed box was just clutter ruining his perfect holiday aesthetic. Get that trash out of here, he snapped. We need room for the wrapping paper. He didn't wait for her to move. He reached down and yanked the case from her small grip. Zoe let out a sharp, terrified gasp, her hands grasping at empty air. No, please, I shouted, scrambling up from the floor. Dad, don't. He didn't even look at me. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the case onto the smoldering logs in the fireplace. For a second, time seemed to stop. The leather hit the embers with a dull thud. Then the heat ate through the dry, old wood of the case. I lunged forward. My hand was inches from the grate, desperate to drag it out before the flames reached the instrument inside. But Thomas stepped in front of me. He was a big man. And he used his weight to block my path, shoving me back with a hard shoulder check. Sit down, Grace, he barked. Stop being dramatic. It's firewood. He stood there, guarding the fireplace like a sentry. A smug grin plastered on his face. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about hierarchy. He thought he was just burning some old wood. He was wrong. Violins aren't just wood. They are coated in layers of varnish, lacquer, and chemical sealants. The strings are synthetic. The chin rest is plastic. When the flames licked up the sides of the instrument, it didn't just burn. It melted. A thick, oily black plume erupted from the fireplace. It didn't smell like a cozy winter fire. It smelled like burning tires and poison. The acrid stench hit us instantly. A chemical punch to the throat that made my eyes water and my lungs seize. What is that? Jessica coughed, waving her hand in front of her face as the black cloud rolled over her pile of gifts. The smoke alarm on the ceiling screamed to life. A piercing, rhythmic shriek that shattered the last pretense of a holiday gathering. The room filled with a toxic haze so dense I could barely see the Christmas tree lights. Thomas stumbled back, coughing, his eyes red and streaming. Open a window, he yelled, sounding more angry than afraid. You're ruining the dinner. He was blaming the violin. He was blaming the smoke. He was blaming me. I looked at him through the black fog. He was covering his mouth with a napkin. Worried about his lungs. Worried about his furniture smelling like smoke. He didn't care that he had just incinerated the only piece of love his father had left behind. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet. Like a wire being cut in the dark. The fear I had carried for 32 years, the fear of his anger, his disapproval, his voice evaporated. The heat of the fire had burned it out of me. I didn't try to save the violin anymore. It was gone. I grabbed Zoe's hand. She was coughing, tears streaming down her face, terror wide in her eyes. I pulled her low, ducking under the worst of the smoke, and moved toward the front door. Where are you going? Thomas shouted over the alarm, his voice rough with smoke. You stay here and help clean this up. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the biting winter air. The silence of the snow was deafening after the chaos inside. Behind me, the smoke alarm wailed on, a siren song for a dying family. I walked to my car, buckled Zoe in, and started the engine. My hands were steady on the wheel. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. Thomas thought he had won because he held the ground. He didn't realize that by burning that bridge, he had just lit the fuse on his own destruction. I drove away, leaving the black smoke to settle into his curtains, his carpets, and his lungs. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait. I drove until the smell of smoke faded from the car's upholstery. We ended up at a chain hotel off the highway, the kind with fluorescent lights and vending machines in the lobby. It wasn't home, but it was warm. I watched Zoe sleep in the other bed. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. The terror of the evening finally washed away by exhaustion. She looked so small against the white sheets. My father thought I was weak. He thought I was just Grace, the quiet one. The daughter who kept her head down and followed rules. He forgot what I actually do for a living. I am a risk auditor. I don't just look at spreadsheets. I look for the lies hidden inside them. I spend my days tracking digital footprints, untangling shell companies, and finding the one decimal point a CEO moved to hide $1 million embezzlement. People lie. Numbers don't. 6 months ago, the numbers told me everything. I had been reviewing the family's old financial records, purely for tax purposes, when I found a discrepancy in my education trust. It wasn't a small error. It was a crater. $185,000. Gone in a single wire transfer 5 years ago. It didn't take me long to trace it. I didn't need to hack anything. The paper trail was right there. Arrogant and sloppy. Thomas hadn't invested it. He hadn't borrowed it for a medical emergency. He had wired it directly to his mortgage lender to pay off the final lump sum on the house. The house he just kicked us out of. I remembered that year. Thomas had blown his own savings on a guaranteed investment scheme that turned out to be a Ponzi fraud. He was terrified of losing his status, of the neighbors seeing a for sale sign on the lawn. So, he cannibalized my future to save his image. When I confronted him about it back then, he didn't deny it. He laughed. He sat in his leather armchair, swirling his scotch, and gaslit me with a smile. I put a roof over your head for 18 years, Grace, he said, waving his hand dismissively. That money was family money. I used it to secure our legacy. You should be thanking me, not auditing me. He thought that was the end of it. He thought because he was my father, theft was just resource reallocation. He believed that possession was 9/10 of the law. Since the deed was in his name, he was safe. But he missed the most important detail. The legal concept that puts people like him in prison. It's called a constructive trust. In the eyes of the law, if you use stolen money to buy an asset, you don't own that asset. You are merely holding it in trust for the victim. You are a squatter in your own investment. Thomas used my $185,000 to buy the equity in that house. That meant the equity didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, watching the city lights flicker outside. Thomas was probably sleeping soundly in his smoke-filled kingdom, thinking he had won because he was the one holding the keys. He didn't realize those keys were already useless. I hadn't sued him for the cash. He was broke. I'd never get it back. Instead, I had gone for the jugular. I went for the house. He thought tonight was about a violin. He didn't know the papers were already signed. He didn't know he was living in my house. On my time. Waiting for my eviction notice. I pulled the duvet up over Zoe's shoulders. Thomas wanted a war over territory? Fine. I was about to show him that he was fighting on land he didn't even own. I knew exactly what people would ask. Why wait? If I found the theft 6 months ago, why let him humiliate us for another half a year? Why let him throw that violin into the fire? The answer is simple. I know Thomas. If I had confronted him the day I found the missing money, he would have exploded. He would have played the victim, rallied the family, and drained his remaining bank accounts to hire a lawyer he couldn't afford just to spite me. He would have dragged the lawsuit out for years, bleeding us both dry, and in the end, the house would have been sold to pay the legal fees. I would have won a moral victory and $0. I didn't want an apology. I wanted the asset. To get the house, I needed a default judgment. I needed him to fail to respond to the lawsuit entirely. And to make a narcissist ignore a lawsuit. You don't threaten him. You feed his ego until he chokes on it. I filed the civil suit for the stolen trust funds and the petition for a constructive trust quietly. I didn't send a sheriff to bang on his door. That would have woken him up. Instead, I hired a private process server who specialized in subtle delivery. It was a Tuesday in July. I parked down the street, watching through binoculars like a sniper waiting for the shot. The process server pulled up in a generic delivery van, holding a massive, gold-wrapped gift basket. A VIP Christmas in July hamper, loaded with premium scotch, Swiss chocolates, and gourmet crackers. Thomas opened the door. He didn't look suspicious. He looked delighted. He saw the gold ribbon and assumed the world was finally recognizing his greatness. Signature required for the VIP package, sir, the server said, holding out a digital tablet. Thomas didn't read the screen. He scribbled his name with a flourish, grabbed the basket, and slammed the door. That signature was the lock snapping shut. Legally, he had just accepted service of the court summons tucked underneath the box of crackers. I watched him through the living room window. He tore into the basket, cracked open the scotch, and laughed. When he found the thick manila envelope at the bottom, he didn't even open it. He saw the legal letterhead, scoffed, and tossed it straight into the recycling bin. To him, it was just junk mail. Noise. Something beneath his notice. That was the moment I won. There is a concept in audit strategy called the rope. When you catch an executive embezzling, you don't stop them immediately. You step back. You let them feel safe. You give them enough rope to hang themselves. I gave Thomas 6 months of rope. I watched him burn through his final savings on a new lease for a luxury SUV he didn't need. I watched him throw a lavish anniversary party for himself, catering it with money that should have gone to a defense attorney. Every dollar he spent on his image was a dollar he couldn't use to fight me. Silence is a weapon. By saying nothing, I let him believe he was winning. I let him believe I was just the stupid, compliant daughter who didn't know how to read a bank statement. His arrogance was my greatest asset. He was so busy playing the king of his castle that he never noticed the deadline for his legal response ticking down to 0. 30 days ago, the clock ran out. The judge granted a default judgment. The title of the house was transferred to my name, to satisfy the debt. Thomas had been living in my house, rent-free, for a month. He thought he was the lord of the manor. He didn't know he was just a squatter, waiting for the sheriff. I turned over in the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. The smoke in my lungs still burned. A reminder of the violin. He had destroyed the past tonight. But he had no idea that I had already foreclosed on his future. Christmas morning was hours away. I closed my eyes and slept like a baby. The war was already over. He just didn't know he was dead yet. Christmas morning broke gray and heavy through the hotel curtains. Beside me, Zoe was still asleep, curled into a tight ball, her breathing the only sound in the room. I sat up and checked my phone. It was 7 in the morning, and the screen was already lit up with 12 missed calls, all from Thomas. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't calling to ask if his granddaughter had recovered from the smoke inhalation or the trauma of watching her heirloom burn. He was calling because he wanted something. I swiped to answer, putting the phone on speaker but keeping the volume low so I wouldn't wake Zoe. Finally, Thomas's voice cracked through the speaker, not with relief, but with irritation. Do you have any idea how much professional smoke remediation costs on a holiday? The soot is everywhere, Grace. It's on the Persian rug. It's on the drapes. The smell is absolutely atrocious. I stared at the wall, feeling a strange sense of detachment. He was talking about dry cleaning bills while I was thinking about the fact that he had legally ceased to be the owner of that house 30 days ago. You're paying for this, he continued, his voice rising. I expect a transfer by noon. And tell your niece she needs to learn to be more careful with her toys. Clumsy. Just like you were. He called the violin a toy. He called the arson he committed an accident caused by a child. Are you listening to me? He snapped. I hear you, I said. My voice was steady, flat. I hear everything you're saying. Good. Don't bother coming back until you have the money. We're trying to salvage Christmas for Jessica, and your drama has already done enough damage. He hung up. The line went dead. He thought he had just issued an ultimatum. He thought he was the gatekeeper, deciding who was allowed inside the castle. He had no idea the castle had been sold out from under him while he was busy admiring his reflection. A second later, a text came through. Jessica, you ruined everything last night. The message read. Now the house smells like burnt plastic. You owe Dad an apology. The arrogance was almost impressive. They were demanding money from the woman who owned the deed. I looked at Zoe half asleep, rubbing her eyes, and typed one reply. I'll see you at 10 o'clock. Thomas would think I was coming to beg. He was wrong. At 5 to 10, I pulled into the driveway and blocked his SUV. A sheriff's cruiser waited at the curb. Sheriff Miller leaned against the hood, court order in hand. Thomas burst out in his robe, coffee mug raised. Finally. Do you have the transfer? He saw the sheriff and froze. This is a writ of possession, Miller said calmly. You're trespassing. The owner has requested removal. Thomas laughed. This is my house. No. Miller replied. It belongs to Miss Grace. I recovered it, I added. You bought it with money you stole from me. He stared, stunned. I'm your father, and I'm your landlord. His knees buckled. You have 15 minutes, Miller said. Inside, drawers slammed. Jessica stuffed handbags into a suitcase. Thomas grabbed electronics and ignored the photos. At 14 minutes they stumbled out. Time was up. I'm your father, he shouted. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, I said evenly. And I don't care. Jessica's Uber arrived. She threw her bags inside and drove off, leaving him alone with his boxes. People would call this cruel. They didn't smell the smoke. They didn't watch a child freeze in the corner of a room. This wasn't revenge. It was surgery. I opened the windows. Cold air rushed in, sweeping away the burn. I would sell the house. Take my money back. Build Zoe something safe. She stared at the ashes. It's gone. I know, I said softly. We'll get a better one. I checked my bank balance, restored, settled, finished, and closed the laptop. Merry Christmas, Zoe. She smiled. The smoke was gone. For the first time in years, the silence felt like peace.